everyone, it's I, Wacky Anime What If here to present you with What If Issei Was Betrayed and Snapped His Limiter, Part 3. I hope you all enjoy, and let's go ahead and get right into this. Before we do, I have a second channel known as Midnight Psycho. I play video games on that channel, such as Among Us, probably a Naruto game coming up, and Fairy Tail, or anything like that. I mean, heck, I'll even play Resident Evil Village eventually, whenever I can get to it. But anyway, let's go ahead and get on to this. Issei has just came across the cabin where he and Aazil used to spend the most time. They used to always be friends. They used to do video games. They used to play Spin the Bottle. Aazil invited a few females that he knew, until Issei went into the closet with one of them because he landed on her on the bottle game. And once he went in the closet, she pulled down her pants. Issei was scared and he started screaming because he found out that some of them were traps, and Aazil put this as a prank. It was really messed up. But anyway, aside from that, the point of this is that Issei, seeing the cabin in this state, there was holes punched through it. The door was ripped off its hinges, and right when Issei walked in, he saw that Aazil was there. He was above 5 devil corpses all around him, spread across the floors and the walls. And he merely looked at Issei and said, "Hey kid, they got me." And he coughed up blood. He was filled with holes. He was injured beyond the point of recovery. Issei could tell this, but he just merely said no, no, no. He ran up towards Aazil, and as soon as Aazil was about to fall from his injuries, Issei picked him up before he fell. And he asked what happened, and Aazil ended up saying, they got us, kid. Only reason why they came to you was because you were the Red Dragon Emperor. Only reason why they revived you. And apparently, Rainier, the incident with Rainier, it was just used to get you on their side, so that they could do this eventually, once you end up unlocking more of the gear, so they don't have to do it later on. And also, you need to run. They're gonna regroup here, and if they see you here, they'll immediately kill you. You don't know what they're capable of. They have something beyond comprehension on their side. We cannot beat them as we are now. But Issei, I believe you can. And before he could say anything else, a light spear came straight through Aazil's chest. And Aazil looked at Issei one last time and said, "I believe in you," and fell to the ground. And Issei looked where the light spear came from with such rage and passion and anger coming out of him that you could see the bloodlust radiating from his body. And he said, "Who dares to do this to the only one I have left? Who?" And he screamed to the sky, and he looked directly to the side of the cabin where the hole from the light spear was, and he saw Cocoville. And Cocoville ended up saying, "Oh, sorry about that. I meant to aim for you, but it looks like this old man got in the way." And he starts laughing maniacally, and Issei ended up staring at him with such bloodlust that he was even freezing. He's a warmonger, for God's sake, is what he was thinking. How am I scared of this little shit? And as soon as he said this, well, you know the rest. Issei disappears, and he's wondering where he went, but he feels a painful sensation, and then he notices that half his vision is gone, and he's plopping to the ground, and he's trying to fly, but he can't. It's odd. He doesn't know why. He doesn't really feel anything either. Wait, I've heard that. Why are these flashing through my head? Memories from his past are flashing through his head. And he thinks, hold up, isn't this when you're about to die? And he then realizes, once he hits the ground, why he can't feel any pain anymore. Half his body was completely blown off. He couldn't feel the pain because it was too much for his body to bear, so it turned off the pain sensors. He managed to get his left side to look at his right side, and he noticed that all there was just blood and guts from his left side pouring out. The right side of his body was nowhere seen. In that mere moment, Issei ran so fast into the sky. He jumped so much into the air and was at such a high speed that he cannonballed directly into Kokovio, into his right side, and blew it off, just with him grazing him with his shoulder. And Kokovio ended up thinking, shit, I shouldn't have fucked with the kid. Before Issei landed back on the ground directly towards his head, and it crushed like a watermelon. The left side crushed like a watermelon, and Issei merely looked at it and started to stomp on the corpse, on the left side of the corpse, over and over and over. Hearing the crunching sound was not satisfying enough for him. He wanted more pain and suffering from him, for what he did, for who he took away from him. His own parents didn't give a shit about him as much as Azazel did. And then on the subject of that, he's thinking, wait, my parents, are they okay? And he started running out of the forest. Didn't even think about checking up on his parents. And he had the balls to go check up on Azazel first and see if he was in the cabin. He didn't even check on his parents first. Sure, they might not have cared for him as much as Azazel did, but they still loved him nonetheless. And as soon as he started running out of the forest, he noticed his speeds were fascinating. They were a lot faster than when he was a devil, or before he became a devil. He was running at such high speeds that everything was a blur to him when he looked around. But he didn't have time to bask in this. He didn't have time to analyze it. He just kept on running. He was running past streets, and all everyone saw was a blur. And one person said, "Oh my god, is it the flat?" And someone said, "Don't be an idiot. The flat doesn't exist." And Issei merely heard this. Some of the words were censored and didn't really come out clear because he was running too fast past them. And he even ran past a red light. And the cop that was on the actual speedometer, the speed that was there literally could not be calculated, and the speedometer exploded. Issei was running as quickly as possible to his house. Once he got there, he saw 7 devils outside of it, and he immediately noticed that there was a force field. He punched the force field with all of his strength, and it exploded. Drake was quite impressed. Drake knows he shouldn't say anything, though. Issei's not in the right state of mind. He should just stay quiet for a little bit, because if he speaks to Issei or tries to comfort him, it might do more harm than good. And Issei currently is staring at the 7 devils, who are surprised that the barrier was broken with a single punch. They look at Issei and they think it's a high-ranked devil, until they look at his face clearly, and they say, it's the betrayer. And Issei merely says, "What did you call me?" And they say, "We know about you. Rudius Grimmery and Sir Zex ended up telling us about how you betrayed the devil race, and that you gave information to the fallen angels, and that they were going to attack us, and you were a double agent." And this made Issei furious. They spin the story. They do this to me. They spin the story in their favor, and they think I won't do anything back. That's what he said in his head. They all started charging at him, and all Issei did was take one step, and he was directly behind 3 of them that were charging at him, and they all exploded into guts. All that was left was their guts and their blood. Their body parts were banished. They just disintegrated from his mere punch. And Issei looked at the rest of them, and they did not want the smoke. They all tried to run, but they couldn't accomplish much. All 4 of them tried to run away. 3 of them tried to fly. One of them was just running because he was so scared he forgot he had wings. And Issei merely appeared behind the one that was on the ground. and whispered in his ear, "I didn't betray them. I didn't betray the devils. They betrayed me." And he punched through his chest. And he ended up screaming, "And I'll make sure they regret every second of it." And he threw the guy's corpse into the air, and it smashed into the two that were trying to fly away. The last one tried to fly faster, because when the corpse hit those two people, their bodies just all exploded at the same time. And he did not want this. He flew as fast as possible, and he felt like he was fast enough to break the sound barrier, but that wasn't enough. He flew all the way into Kohai, trying to tell Miss Grimmery about what happened, but Issei was following in pursuit, directly behind him. And when he looked behind him, he saw nothing anymore. The devil saw nothing, and he sighed in relief. He looked in front of him, and he saw Issei's blank expression on his face, staring at him with the coldest eyes. And he immediately said, "You're done." And the devil said, "No, I can tell you information." And just like that, he couldn't speak anymore. His angle he was staring at Issei was quite odd. He was looking up at Issei now, and his head, he felt like he was falling to the ground, but he couldn't feel the rest of his body. And then he saw his body falling down in front of Issei, and it fell to the ground, and his head just saw Issei above him. And that's all. He realized he was decapitated, and that the devil should be very afraid of this man. He may be a grunt soldier, but he isn't that weak. He could have been in the elite forces that Sir Zex made, but he had one flaw. He didn't have enough magic. He was the fastest in speed, though, and he was outran by him. He was literally scared. And Issei, who thought he was flying, fell to the ground and realized, "Oh yeah, I'm not a devil anymore. I wasn't actually flying. It was just my mere jump that made it look like I was flying." And he merely walked away and ran towards his house, because he realized there could be more inside of his house. Why didn't he think about this? Once he ran to his house, he kicked down the door and looked around and tried to find his mother, his father, and his little sister. He had a little sister in this, and she was the most adorable person. She was always there for him. She always made him little pancakes when in the morning, always gave him hugs, and he always spoiled her. Gave her many items, many dolls. And once Issei looked around and couldn't find them, he became panicked. He ran up to the upstairs. He kicked down his mom and dad's door, and he saw something grotesque. He saw his mom and his dad. They were both strung up right in front of their bedroom. They were hung in front of the edge of the bed by their own intestines, and they had notes pinned on them saying, "You damn traitor, we'll kill you, we'll kill everything that you love, and we'll make sure that you burn in hell for eternity." And Issei merely looked at that, and once he read that letter, he bursted with anger. He screamed on the top of his lungs, and magical energy was bursting out of him. His power was getting stronger and stronger. He was getting angrier and angrier. Drake wasn't even boosting him, but it felt like he had done 1,000,000 boosts compared to what he usually was. And the entire house started to almost explode. And then Drake ended up trying to talk some sense into him, said, partner, be careful. You're drawing too much power here. If you do so much power here, all the devils will appear and they'll know where you are. And also, you didn't check the house to see if your sister's still okay." And Issei started to calm down and said, "You're right. I have to check if my sister's okay." And his voice was quite weak. And Drake couldn't bear to see Issei like this. Drake saw him as a friend. They always got to know each other. They were always there for each other. And they always supported each other, since they were partners. Since the day that he unlocked Drake, they always were friends. But him seeing him seeing Issei like this just broke Drake's heart. But he just hopes he can become happy again. Issei started looking around the house and couldn't find his sister. And then he went into his sister's room, and he felt his heart drop when he opened the door. He saw his sister. He had a doll in front of her. She saw a doll in front of her, and she was faced away from him. Issei walked towards her and was relieved for a second that his sister was okay, and he tapped her to the side and looked at her face and saw that her eyes were gouged out and they were replaced with doll eyes. Her face was completely made of wax now. Wax was smeared all over it. Burning wax melted into her flesh, and her hands were completely looked like they were made of plastic, and they were melted with wax. She looked almost like a doll, and Issei could barely tell this was his sister until he saw the birthmark on the back of her neck. And it was a birthmark that was quite the thing. It was a heart, in which she always ended up saying, you know, I like my birthmark because it reminds me that I always have a brother that loves me. Even though she was made fun of it. Made fun of for it. She always said that it was always there and that she could always love her big brother, and that this was a reminder that she could always love him and always have him with her, and that she could always depend on him. And this just, no. Issei just fell to the ground and grabbed onto his little sister and held her close, even though she looked unsightly currently. Issei couldn't help but cry into her, and his power was just bursting out, and he started screaming, no, 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 why me? Why? Why, God? No, why? And he screamed with all of his might, and his anger was bursting out at such high rates. And Drake ended up telling him, please calm down, you'll destroy everything at this rate. And Issei merely muttered, destroy everything? Everything that I owned was always just already destroyed. So why do I care if everything else is destroyed? Huh? Drake, answer me! And he cried even louder, the tears streaming through his face. And Drake could even feel the connection of his emotions. And Drake inside the gear was also crying. And he merely said, just don't become a monster. These people have everything too. They have families just like how you did. Are you going to take it away from them just because yours was taken? We can still have revenge on them. But if you release so much power, you'll destroy everything around this house. Including your neighbors who are nice to you. Including their families, including the kids. Are you going to do this just because you're wallowing in your despair and anger? And Issei merely calmed down and said, you're right. But what am I going to do? Drake, answer me. And then we time skip 2 years later. Issei has faked his death, and he has a new identity. He is known as Lucifer Morningstar. He managed to make this his own name. Currently, Morningstar, Mr. Morningstar, he heard, and then he saw his secretary. Issei, after the incident, became a well-known businessman. He went into stocks, and he managed to do business everywhere around the world. And he managed to change his appearance. He has snow white hair, and he has completely silver eyes. His eyes turned silver after the incident. He trained as hard as he could, every single day, for 2 years. No matter if it felt like his bones were breaking, he continued ushering. His muscles felt like they were tearing, but he didn't care anymore. He had nothing left but this training routine he went through. So he went into stocks, and he wanted to make sure that he was as powerful as possible so he could take down the devils. He needed more resources, more money. In Ko-Town, he was a well-known figure. Even though he was only 18 at this moment, and he was still in Kohai, but he was as an exchange student. He never interacted with the ORC. They never really recruited him because, well, there was no aura coming from him because Issei suppressed it. And Issei and his secretary always ended up, well, they always ended up making sure that their business would be as legit as possible. They donated to orphanages. They donated to the homeless shelters. He always wanted others to have happiness, the one thing that he could never attain for himself. And his secretary was once an orphan. Well, wasn't an orphan, but was once homeless. And he took her in, and when they started the business, she started to grow fond of him. Issei noticed this, but didn't really say anything, because he doesn't want to get into anything like this. He's still thinking of how to get revenge, and he's been following tracks of the devils through info brokers. One of his info brokers are telling him that there would be a meeting between all the factions in 2 months, and Issei is currently ready. He's in his penthouse that he bought with his own money. He bought out the whole penthouse, and he's going over a board. He has everything pinned. He has Sir Zex pinned onto all of his drug trafficking and all of his horrible deeds. How he ends up grabbing children and getting a professor to experiment on them, turning them into false devils or true devils by experimentation, by altering their genetics, because the devil race cannot die off, is what Sir Zex always said. And how Rias ended up dragging in innocent people and getting them slaughtered and turning them into devils and adding her to her barrage or her army. And how Kiba has been going through the sword experiment trying to find this person known as Freed. And also how he's been trying to cover up the fact that Kiba wasn't a victim of the sword experiment, that he was one of the main factors of the sword experiment. He was actually, believe it or not, the info broker. He told Freed and all of them, whenever one of the children escaped, he told them. But he also didn't let the children know. He befriended them and give them false hope. And then when they tried to escape, he would snuff it out. And he learned that Konako murdered many people when she was on her little rampages, when she couldn't control her power. But she didn't dislike doing it. She did it even when her power wasn't under control, because she felt like she was on top of the world, and her internal instinct of hunting prey came out. The cat-like instinct of that was what she ended up having a sin of. Issei pinned all the sins that they've ever done, and all the misdeeds they did to him. They all had a part of his parents' death, Azazel's death, and everyone he cared for. And they all betrayed him. He made sure that this hurt like hell for them. And he started throwing darts at the picture of Sir Zex on the dartboard. He hit directly into the middle. And he said, "I'm going to get my revenge. And it's going to be very sweet."